disagreeing. But here are some differences. You could say that Slavoj belongs to a modern tradition of philosophy, whereas I would say that I belong to what I call a non-modern tradition of philosophy that's more recent. I'm stealing that term non-modern from Bruno Latour. Slavoj would say that we are seeking a re-enchantment of the world after the alienation of modernity, whereas I would say the world was never disenchanted in the first place. We've always been fascinated by the world. We've always been entangled with it and involved with it. Another thing, an issue I have with modern philosophy is that modern philosophy is in many ways a taxonomy. It says there are at least two different kinds of beings, thought and world, or nature and spirit, or human and world. It starts by saying there are two totally different kinds of things and they both need a different ontology to handle them properly. The human thought needs one kind of ontology, nature needs another ontology. Whereas, by the way, I see this as an extension of the medieval taxonomy, which was between creator and created. There were two also basic kinds of things for medieval ontology. Whereas in non-modern philosophy, we start with what we call a flat ontology, which means we start off by assuming that everything has to be treated in the same terms. So we start off by assuming that the human being is simply an object like others. Yes, a very interesting object to us, an object that has lots of talents, perhaps, that chairs and tables do not, but an object nonetheless, and that you cannot start off by inscribing what's special about humans into the very foundation of philosophy. That has to come later. And so you have to start off, this is why we give long lists a lot in object-oriented ontology. I'll say paper, grasshoppers, the planet Mars, chemicals, and so forth. You'll find 9 or 10 of these objects in a row. It's an attempt to create that sense of flattening for the reader. All right. There's also a kind of philosophy that I would call neo-modern philosophy, which I think describes Slavoj's position a little more accurately. I should say that neo usually is taken as a derogatory prefix. If you call somebody neo something or other, it often means that you're just accusing them of rehashing the original version. That's not what I mean here. By neo-modern philosophy, I mean the kind that doesn't stay with a simple opposition between subject and object, but that tends to assimilate the object into the subject in some way. And so this starts with authors like Maimon and Fichte, the ones immediately after Kant, where Kant said there is a thing in itself out there that we can think about, but we can never know. These critiques of Kant tended to say that that itself is a performative contradiction, because if you're thinking a thing outside thought, that itself is a thought, and therefore it makes no sense to talk about this thing in itself that's outside of thought. The thing in itself has to somehow be inscribed in the thought, the circle of thought already. You find a lot of this in Slavoj's work, you find it in Badiou's, you also find it in Quentin Meillassoux of my own generation. It also has an inverse, which I would call arch-modernism, which is where they're reducing the subject to the object, say to cognitive science, a way of trying to minimize the modern difference by letting science be the dominant discourse. And what Slavoj tells us in a number of his publications is that the way Hegel radicalized